All right, buckle up, everybody. You guys requested we take a look at some pretty wild stuff. And let me tell you, the connections we found are, well, mind-blowing is putting it lightly.
Well, yeah.
We're going deep on financial scams,
Yeah.
international intrigue, even potential terrorism.
Mm.
And the root of it all, believe it or not,
Okay.
the cannabis industry.
Really? I mean, it's fascinating how all these things, at first glance, seem totally random.
Yeah.
Like a failed cannabis investment platform or the discovery of incendiary devices.
Right.
All tie back to the same group of people. It's wild.
It really is. And we've got a whole stack of sources to try to untangle this web. News articles, some deep dive investigative pieces, even some legal updates.
Wow.
You might want to grab a notepad for this one, folks.
Yeah, this one's
Pretty complex.
Yeah. So let's just start with what kind of kicked this whole thing off, what grabbed everyone's attention. Juicy Fields.
Juicy Fields. This cannabis investment platform was like all the rage, and then boom, it imploded in 2023. Left a lot of investors scratching their heads.
Oh, yeah. The Juicy Fields case website really lays it out pretty clearly. Investors were, enticed by the promise of huge returns, right? From cultivating cannabis, who wouldn't be? Seemed like easy money. Almost too good to be true.
You know what they say about things that seem too good to be true?
Right.
So what happened? Did they just take the money and run?
Exactly. Classic exit scam. Poof. The platform vanishes overnight. Millions gone. But here's where things get interesting. This wasn't their first time.
Hold on. They'd pulled this off before, like with a different scam.
Yeah. Lars Olofsson, he's been doing a lot of the investigating here, uncovered that this same group had actually run a very similar scam before called Recyclix.
Recyclix. Rings a bell. What was their game with that one?
Well, the Juicy Fields case website, they detail this one too. It was basically the same scam, just a little greener, Investors thought they were going to profit from recycling plastic waste. They even had like this whole website where you could supposedly see your plastic being processed.
Oh, wow. So they basically took their old playbook, dusted it off, slapped a new coat of paint on it, and went after a hot new industry. Pretty, I don't know what they'd say, clever.
Yeah.
Definitely something. So who are these masterminds? Who's behind all this?
Well, now things get a little darker, a little more sinister. Our sources, especially this pasted text document, point to Alexander Sivaks and his daughter, Isabella.
A father-daughter duo. That's something else. What's their story? What's their background?
Well, Alexander Sivaks, he's a bit of a mystery. Some describe him as a Russian mafia boss.
Oh, wow.
With deep ties to the FSB, Russia's version of the CIA.
Okay.
As a whole other layer to this, right? And then you've got Isabella. Apparently, she was the one actually running the day-to-day operations of both Recyclix and Juicy Fields.
Wow.
She was using aliases, Erika Misela, Izabella Baceka, trying to stay under the radar.
So they had the brains, the muscle, international connections. No wonder they got away with it for so long. But, surely they got caught eventually. Right?
Well, Isabella, she was arrested, actually. She's currently waiting to be extradited to Spain.
Okay.
But Alexander Sivaks, still out there.
Still out there. Wow. After all of this, the alleged mastermind is just roaming free.
It's pretty unsettling, right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how far their reach goes.
Yeah.
And it definitely raises some serious questions about how well law enforcement can actually combat these kinds of international criminal networks, especially when they've got ties to, powerful figures. But hold on, because it gets even weirder. We haven't even talked about the incendiary devices.
Incendiary devices. This just took a hard left turn. What were they targeting?
Okay, so according to these articles from The Week and utoday.net, these devices were disguised as, get this, electric massagers.
Oh, electric massagers.
Yeah, and they were packed with this highly flammable magnesium-based substance. And they were intended to be planted on cargo or passenger flights headed to North America.
Hold up. Are you saying they were trying to blow up planes? This isn't just about money anymore?
Exactly. And the scary part is, this wasn't some random act. Everything points to a very carefully planned operation.
Okay, but how does this tie back to Juicy Fields?
Yeah.
To the Sivaks family? It can't be a coincidence, can it?
You're right to be suspicious. Nothing in this story is a coincidence. This email.txt file we got, it shows that Alexander Sivaks, the guy who was arrested for sending those devices, he was also a shareholder in Recyclix.
Whoa, so there's a direct connection between these financial scams and a potential act of terrorism? This is starting to feel less like a business podcast and more like, I don't know, a spy thriller or something.
Right.
And if Alexander Sivaks, with his alleged ties to the FSB, is involved in this, I mean,
Yeah.
that adds a whole other layer, right? Could this be something bigger, state-sponsored even?
It's a big question. FreightWaves actually quotes Western intelligence officials, and they are really worried about the potential for, Russian sabotage operations.
Hmm.
Clearly, they're taking this very seriously.
So we've gone from cannabis investments to potentially international terrorism in like, what, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. It's definitely complex, and honestly, we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
But before we jump into the implications and all that, I think it's worth just taking a step back.
Yeah.
What are your initial thoughts? What stands out to you so far?
Well, first of all, the audacity of these schemes is just mind-blowing. And the fact that they were able to operate across so many different countries seemingly unchecked is pretty alarming.
Yeah. I mean, it really highlights how hard it is to deal with transnational crime, especially when you've got these, like, really sophisticated actors who might have, state backing.
And the fact that they escalated from, financial fraud to something as serious as trying to plant incendiary devices on planes, I mean, that's a huge red flag. What does that tell us about the future of crime?
That's a big question, and it's one that we're going to be exploring in part 2.
Okay.
This case, it might be a sign of things to come, like a new breed of criminal enterprise where you've got financial gain mixed with acts of terror. It's a pretty chilling thought, and one that definitely deserves a closer look.
Yeah.
But for now, let's just take a quick breather. We'll be back in a minute to dig deeper into this whole mess.
All right, so we've kind of laid the groundwork here. We've got these really elaborate financial scams, Juicy Fields, Recyclix, and then bam, this sudden escalation to like potential terrorism with these incendiary devices. It's a lot to process, I have to say.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's really easy to get lost in the weeds, with the how of it all. Like, how do they pull off these scams? How do they even get these incendiary devices? But what's even more important, and honestly probably even more unsettling, is the why. Like, why do all this? What does it tell us about, I don't know, the bigger picture?
You're right, we got to connect the dots, not just with, in this case, but like to the larger trends, right? So where do we even start unpacking that?
Well, I mean, one thing that jumps out right away is the possibility of state involvement. We talked about Alexander Sivaks and his, alleged connections to the FSB. And FreightWaves, remember, they were highlighting those concerns from Western intelligence about, Russian sabotage. It makes you wonder, are we looking at something bigger than just a criminal enterprise here? Could this be part of some, like, geopolitical strategy?
Right, that's a pretty unsettling thought, right? Are you saying that a government might be involved in, or at least, turning a blind eye to this kind of stuff? Wouldn't that be, like, incredibly risky for them?
Well, it's definitely risky, but I mean, it's not unheard of. There are, historical examples where governments have used organized crime to kind of achieve their goals. It could give them like plausible deniability, right? While they're disrupting their adversaries. Could be financial destabilization, could be just sowing chaos, who knows?
So in this case, you're saying Juicy Fields and Recyclix, those scams, they could have been a way to generate cash for other activities, maybe even something like those incendiary devices.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, these scams, they weren't small time. They pulled in millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars from investors all over the world. Imagine what kind of funding that could provide, especially if it's being like laundered through this whole network designed to hide where it came from.
It's a pretty disturbing thought. And if the people behind this are operating with, some level of state protection, that makes them incredibly hard to track down, to hold accountable. It'd be like trying to catch a ghost.
Exactly. Traditional law enforcement, they often struggle with these transnational networks, especially when they have, powerful friends in high places. You need a different approach, something more proactive. You got to focus on disrupting their operations, cutting off their resources. Intelligence is key.
So we're talking about a whole new level of sophistication here, not just in terms of like the crimes themselves, but also the methods needed to actually fight them. It's a far cry from, the old days of drug busts and bank robberies.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the world of crime has changed big time.
Yeah.
You've got organized crime, technology, geopolitics, all mixed together now,
Mm-hmm.
creates this, like, tangled web of threats that are incredibly difficult to unravel.
And it's not just about making money anymore, right? I mean, those incendiary devices, that just adds a whole other element of, well, danger to this. If those had gone off on a plane, the consequences would have been catastrophic. It makes you wonder if we're seeing a shift, like, in the goals of these organizations, like a willingness to use violence, terror to get what they want.
It's a scary thought, and one that we have to take seriously. If this is like the new normal, we need to be prepared to adapt our strategies, our resources, everything.
So what does that even look like? I mean, what can actually be done to combat these, like, super sophisticated criminal networks?
Well, it takes a multifaceted approach, right? For starters, we need stronger international cooperation. These networks, they don't care about borders, so we need a coordinated response. Sharing intelligence, sharing resources, sharing expertise. Like Europol, they're actually playing a key role in facilitating this kind of collaboration, which is great.
Collaboration, though, that can be slow, bureaucratic, right? What about in the short term? How do we stop these things before they even start?
Public awareness is huge. Education is key. We need to equip people to recognize these scams, right? To be skeptical, especially of anything promising like quick riches. Do your due diligence before you invest in anything that sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get swept up in the hype, right? Especially when you see other people making money, seemingly, out of thin air. But we got to remember, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Exactly. There's always a catch. And if you don't understand the risks, you're basically asking to be a victim. Another thing, be careful about the information you share online. These groups, they use social engineering, to gather data, personal data, that they can use to target people for scams, even identity theft.
So it's not just about being smart with your money, it's about being, like, mindful of your digital footprint, too.
Right. Be aware of the risks and take steps to protect yourself. And if you do fall victim to a scam, report it. Don't be embarrassed. The more information law enforcement has, the better chance they have of actually catching these criminals and stopping them from hurting other people.
That's a good point. I think sometimes people feel ashamed, if they fall for a scam, but reporting it can actually help prevent others from going through the same thing.
Exactly. Sharing your story, even if it's hard, it can make a difference.
So I guess the key to all of this is kind of a multi-pronged approach, right? Strengthening international cooperation, investing in technology, raising public awareness, and just fostering a culture of, like, vigilance skepticism.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not about one single solution.
Yeah.
It's got to be holistic, addressing the problem from all sides.
And it's got to be ongoing, right? This isn't something we can just fix and then forget about.
Definitely not. Crime is constantly evolving. We got to be adaptable, innovative. We got to keep learning, keep changing, keep working together if we want to make the world a safer place.
Well said. Okay, so we talked about the need for international cooperation, being more aware, tackling corruption. But what about the tech side of things? These guys are clearly, like, tech savvy, right? They're using all these sophisticated methods to move money around, communicate, stay hidden. How do we keep up with that?
That's a crucial part of this fight. We need to be investing in cybercrime investigation, intelligence gathering. We need the tools, the expertise to track how money's moving through these networks to disrupt their communications.
It's like a constant race, isn't it? Technology is changing so fast.
It is. But remember, technology is a double-edged sword. The same tools criminals use, we can use them too, right? To expose them. It's all about staying ahead of the curve, using these advancements to our advantage.
So can you give us, like, a specific example of how technology is being used to fight these networks?
Sure. One thing that's showing a lot of promise is using AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to analyze huge amounts of data. These technologies can help investigators track money through shell corporations, uncover hidden connections, even predict criminal activity before it happens.
That's pretty powerful stuff, but doesn't that raise privacy concerns? I mean, where do we draw the line between, security and individual rights?
That's a valid question, and one that we need to be really careful about. It's a balancing act. We have to make sure these technologies are being used responsibly, ethically, within the law.
It feels like we're in uncharted territory here. New challenges popping up every day. It's a lot to grapple with.
It is, but it's important to remember we're not powerless. If we work together, if we share information, if we adapt, we can combat these threats. We can make the world a safer, more just place.
I like that. That's a message I think we all need to hear. But before we get too optimistic, let's bring it back down to earth a little. What's being done specifically about Juicy Fields Recyclix to bring the people responsible to justice?
Well, Isabella Sivaks, remember, she was arrested. That's a big step. But her father, Alexander, he's still out there. And his connections to the FSB, those make things really complicated. Lars Olafsson, he's been amazing at exposing these scams. He's continuing to pursue legal action. And there are investigations happening all over the world.
But even if they catch everyone involved, what are the chances of getting that money back? We're talking about millions of dollars, potentially hundreds of millions?
It's a tough one. And unfortunately, the odds are often stacked against the victims. These scams, they're designed to make it really hard to trace the money. They use shell companies, offshore accounts, the whole nine yards.
So even if justice is served, the victims might never see their money again.
Yeah, that's the harsh reality. And it just underscores how important prevention is. Educating people, teaching them about the warning signs, promoting responsible investing.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting ourselves, our communities from these threats.